view is simply that we don't find the airtime to discuss what is, after all, the global agreement on fighting extreme poverty, hunger, and disease. By my count, President Bush has mentioned the Millennium Development Goals once. I was there September 14th, 2005, when he spoke at the United Nations last year. I don't recall, and I ask apologies if I'm wrong, but I don't recall another instance in which he mentioned the Millennium Development Goals in any speech. I've not heard a single congressional campaigner or Senate campaigner or anybody else mention the Millennium Development Goals in our campaign this fall. Indeed, I haven't heard a word by a single politician in this country about the poor in the world because it's not really part of our discussion. I think this is a big mistake, not only for our values, which I would put first, not only for our responsibilities, but for our own safety. As I indicated earlier, I believe that global solidarity is not only a deep moral and ethical commitment and a principle of life, but a basic practical approach to global security as well. And when people feel that they're abandoned by us, everything is possible. Indeed, the worst kinds of tragedies and instability. So the Millennium Development Goals were agreed 6 years ago. They are really quite a bit discussed in other parts of the world. You'd be surprised to know it, perhaps. In a typical newspaper in a very poor country, almost every article refers, and not quite, but every article about an economic issue or a conference or a foreign speaker refers to the Millennium Development Goals. You pick up the press in Kenya and there's a seminar about information technology. It will say, in order to help achieve the Millennium Development Goals in Kenya, we had a seminar on information technology. Now, these goals are practical, and they are quantitative, and they are time-bound, and they're available on innumerable websites. So look them up and have a look at what they are. One place to look them up, by the way, is at the website www.UN Millennium Project, all linked together, UN Millennium Project. Millennium's a tough word, 2 L's, 2 N's, project.org. And you can learn about the Millennium Development Goals there. They are time-bound, quantified goals. For instance, reduce child mortality by 2/3 by the year 2015. If we were discussing these, and if we were backing them, and if we were committed to them in a very practical way, and if our congressmen and president were behind them in an active manner, these goals would get accomplished for the very reason that I indicated. There are practical things that can be done that will make a huge difference, whether it's immunizations or bed nets or antiretroviral medicines or emergency obstetrical care, or deworming medicines, or a specific list, really, of the things that need to get done in a clinic in a poor community that are absolutely practical, that aren't getting done right now, and helping these communities get that. So the biggest obstacle is awareness. I actually think that awareness is about 90% of the problem of the planet. The lack of understanding, the lack of direct communications between different groups, the lack of empathy, the ability to see things out of the eyes of others. To me, this is much, much more consequential than any of the other divisions we face, than any of the claims about the war on terror and so forth. I think the lack of understanding, but bridgeable understanding, is by far the biggest challenge. And by far the most important route to achieving the Millennium Development Goals. I've yet to see anyone argue with me, oh, no, we're against anti-malaria bed nets. No way we're going to get a $5 bed net to an impoverished child. People don't argue that. They say, oh, never heard of it. Or didn't know that they didn't already protect children? Or where can I get a bed net? And by the way, the answer to that one, I'll just sneak in, is www.millenniumpromise. So same theme, millenniumpromise.org.
Let me, if I could ask you though, I mean to press it, because folks here are trying to mobilize and over time build support for this. I think your stress on awareness, intellectual understanding, information fits really well in a Catholic view that says that we've got to understand the world if we're going to change it. Let me raise a different question though. The UN plays a great legitimizing role, a great place of, as Paul Kennedy calls it, a parliament of the human community. But in all honesty, there also are grave doubts about the deliverability capability of the UN. And it runs from either it's sort of big, lumbering, doesn't get the job done, if I can put it in your practical terms, or questions about corruption, either within countries or within the UN.
Yeah.
What's your honest assessment about the degree to which this constitutes an obstacle, either perceived or real?
Well, I think it does constitute an obstacle, but not, again, an unsolvable one. But mainly, it's surprising to tell you, it seems so strange and perverse. The UN is not designed to get the job done. It's not designed to implement, mainly because we don't want it to be that way. The United States and some other big powers traditionally didn't want a powerful United Nations. That would be competition with the great powers. I'm afraid that I don't want to get too political, but I think we've been aiming even more in that direction in recent years. That somehow it was felt that the UN was a threat to U.S. sovereignty. We wouldn't be able to do what we want to do. Well, we learned that doing what we say we want to do, despite what the world is advising us, isn't so smart. But is UNICEF really an obstacle to U.S. sovereignty? Is the World Health Organization really an obstacle to U.S. sovereignty? Is the Food and Agriculture Organization really an obstacle? So what I would say is we could have a UN that is far more operational if the big powers, starting with us, would say we want the UN to implement better and to empower it to do its job. Because frankly, the UN was under budget shadow for 10 years. We didn't pay our dues. It's strapped actually for cash on even the specialized agencies fighting diseases. And my experience is not that all the money by any means for this should go through the UN. That I wouldn't say that for one moment. But if the big powers said to the UN, we really stand behind the Millennium Development Goals, and we really stand behind the UN organization to take this up and scale up the battle, and we're looking for the advice on how to do this, you'd get a tremendous amount done. Now, on the corruption issue, the point about corruption is, of course, it's everywhere. Not just Washington, everywhere. And it's a real problem. It's a problem in any social process. So what you have to do is you have to be very practical and down to earth and looking for solutions. I don't want to give money away as a solution to poverty. The approach that I argue for has very little to do with money. I do want to give away bed nets. They're really bulky. They can't fit in a safe deposit box. You can actually follow them, trace them right down to the huts. You can visit them with a Red Cross volunteer 2 months after distribution. Tell the people in the villages, we're going to come by, make sure you're using the bed nets appropriately.